Okay, great. So as Dan introduced me, I'm Sonali. I work on the professional services team at Cambridge Intelligence. And today we'll just be running through a presentation that my colleague Katerina created, which is effective insights, mainly for data dashboards. So thinking about if you have different components on your dashboard and how we can get the most effective insights from those. So I think a common problem that data dashboards have is that it can be really overwhelming to get information for an end user. Sometimes you don't really know what you want, or if you want to follow a very specific workflow, you need to be able to provide features on your dashboard so your end user can do that. So how would you structure your dashboard to ensure effective results at any level? So we've got a mental kind of checklist of things that we want to focus on for this. So the first thing we want it to give an accurate summary of the data that you have. And this is a kind of recurring theme throughout the presentation. We want it to provide on-demand details. So we don't want to overwhelm the end user with a lot of information and leave them confused. And we want to make sure that if we have more than one component, that the data that you're seeing is in sync and that there's a two-way communication between these components. So the use case we'll be using today is an email communications network. So it's data from a fictitious company between employees of emails. So kind of in our first view, we have two components in our dashboard. On the left-hand side, we have our key lines graph of a network, and you can see that this is a really highly connected network where a lot of people email each other. And on the right-hand side, we have this in Chronograph as well, showing all of the different moments or emails at specific times or days. And at kind of a high level, this is not a particularly useful view because even though it's showing you your data, you can't really see anything from it. You can't get anything interesting. You can kind of see from the heat map on the timeline that at what points are a bit busier, but we don't know anything about the employees of this company. So we can kind of solve this problem by trying to emulate what a user might think. And a question that they might ask is, which departments communicate the most with the HR team? So from this initial view, you cannot answer this question. You don't know which employees are in which teams. You don't know when the HR team mainly communicate. So the few things that we can do to kind of to add to this is, one, we can kind of select and find out who our HR team members are. So this is in the data. So here we've just focused on them. We can foreground them, so that's bringing the user's attention to this group of employees, but still that's not answering our question because we don't know who these people are communicating with. We can also focus them on the timeline, so that way that they're in sync. But I think the most important thing, what we want to do is we want to be able to group our nodes. So here we've just combined our HR team into one combo. And in the next slide, you can open up this combo to see that all of the employees are within it. And following this step, we'd want to also group them on the Chronograph timeline, which we do here. So here you can see in a much more clear visual way what areas of interest that your user might be looking at. But this, again, still doesn't really answer our question because we want to see who else the HR team are communicating with. So the next logical step in that would be to group all of the other teams. So if we now combine all of our teams, we get a much more manageable view. It's still pretty connected. You can see a lot of the teams just communicate with each other, and we want to be able to also group them on our timeline. So it's a lot clearer to see that, but it's still a bit confusing because they're all the same color. You can't really see that communication that clearly on the timeline itself, and you don't know kind of how much communication is going on between teams. So we can add some more features still that will help your user but won't visually overwhelm them or kind of clutter the chart. So we can add some color coding to this. This makes it, one, a lot clearer to see, to match up the chart nodes with the chronograph entities. And you can kind of see a few more patterns going on between communication in teams. And this is great, and it's a lot easier for your user to kind of follow a path. But I think the final thing we'd want to do is we want to add some kind of visual cue to see the quantity of communication. So we can do that by sizing our nodes and our links by the number of employees within the combo, and also the number of communications. So here we used the keyline centrality algorithm to size these. So the nodes are sized by the number of employees within them, and the links are sized by how many email communications. So if we now focus on the HR team, you can see that the thickest link, so with the most communication, is with the finance team, and also on the timeline, you can see that there's a kind of a greenish hue also reiterating that point. And kind of following along that same vein of questioning, we want to maybe think of a more specific use case that your user might have. For example, looking at a particular individual within the team. So we want to ask the question, who is T Vega communicating with? So again, the view that we just had from our dashboard doesn't really give us that much insight into who T Vega is and what are they doing within the company. So you can see at first glance that they're in the marketing team, but we want to be able to focus on this person and have those different levels of insight. So if we now open up the marketing combo, we can see T Vega. And what we've done here is we've used reveal to reveal the links in the combo. So when T Vega is selected, a few things happen. So you can see that the links and the communications between the different teams, between the different between the different teams, and also on the timeline you can see who T Vega is communicating with throughout the entire network, and all of those email communications. So now we've answered that question, but what about a different use case of looking at a specific time? So which teams and team members were communicating after 4 p.m. on Friday, the 14th of May? This is a really specific use case for the user, and you want to make it really easy for them to be able to go to that time and see exactly who was communicating via email. So if I zoom in here, you can see that the timeline itself filters out. So after kind of 4 p.m., these are all of the interactions that happened. This is great because you can see this clearly, but it's not matched up with the chart here. All of the combos are still here, and that's not correct data that you're showing your end user. So you want to sync these up. So once the timeline has been filtered, you also want to apply that same filtering to your chart. So in this next slide, you'll be able to see when we zoom in, but the chart also is kind of in sync, and you can see the combo nodes actually changing in size depending on the different nodes and events that are available for the timeline as well. So kind of after 4 p.m., you can see that these are the only nodes that are visible, and this is the correct data that we want to be showing our end user, and it'll be easier for them to follow that, to answer that question of, you know, who was communicating at this time visually, having that information. So on a more kind of broader scale, you might not know what your user is looking for. So they've got specific use cases. I'm looking for a particular individual or a time, but what about more kind of general patterns? So we can ask questions like, what is the distribution of the communications between the company's departments? So right now, our current dashboard, we can kind of get some insight into that. So we can see at the link widths, we can kind of see the heat map on on the timeline, and we can kind of get some insights. But what if we want actual quantifiable values and actual numbers to say that, oh, this amount they are communicating with, the finance team are communicating with HR. And we want to be able to do that visually, again, without overwhelming the user, but also in a way that is useful for the user to get on demand. So you don't want to overwhelm them. And so we can do this by adding donuts. And donuts kind of work like pie charts. So you can see here that the segments on the donut represent how much communication they've got with the different teams. And if we open up, you can see individuals as well and how they communicate. However, this is still a little bit overwhelming. You don't, if you're an end user, you might not want all of this information. You might just want a specific individual. So in that case, it's kind of, that's why you want to give it to them on demand. So in our next slide, we've now bound an event. So on a selection change, when you select a component, then only will the donut appear. And that's a lot more useful. And you're giving the user exactly what they asked for in that instance, as opposed to seeing everything at once. So it's easier for them to make sense with. But I think one extra thing we can add to this to make it absolutely quantifiable is using tooltips. So now if I want to see exactly how often or how much overall the finance department communicates with HR, we can use tooltips. So when we hover over the segments, you can see that 19% of overall communications is to HR, is between HR and finance. So that's a really great way of being able to get this high level view without kind of cluttering up the chart, without and also giving the user a kind of clear path to follow and get their information. And kind of following on that line of thinking of finding like high level patterns, we can also use some chronograph features for this. So which employees frequently send group emails at unusual hours. So as Dan mentioned earlier, using scale wrapping or the pattern of life would be really useful in this situation. So here on the timeline, you can see that this represents an entire day. The hours between, say, 9 a.m. and 6 p.m. are kind of the main work hours. And you can then focus in on these unusual hours that people are sending emails at. So at 12 a.m. or maybe later at like 9 p.m. So we can zoom in and we can see exactly who are sending emails in the middle of the night and answer that question as well. So now we've effectively answered all of our questions. We can go back to our mental checkboxes for creating an effective dashboard. So we know we've given an accurate summary with both high and low level views of our data. We've provided on-demand details through revealing links, through tooltips or donuts, and ensuring a two-way communication between components. So we're syncing up our data when we're filtering to make sure that everything the user is seeing is accurate. So a quick summary of all the features that we included in this was combos to group together your data, to color code and size the nodes and links to provide a higher level visual output that is useful and provides some insight, revealing links and focusing on entities on demand, as well as foregrounding nodes and links. So you want to have that real-time kind of reaction from users to get that information that they need and to allow them to get that information. Using donuts for additional information, as well as tooltips, a great way of adding these features in without visually cluttering, and scale wrapping for pattern detection with Chronograph for looking at patterns over a certain period of time. So that was the end of the presentation, and if you've had any questions, please feel free to ask.